Coach Easton Nelson. I appreciate you being on here. I do want to preface the whole interview with I am dealing with a cold. So anybody that listens to this and be like, why does Adam sound like he's all stuffed up? It's because I am pretty stuffed up right now. So I apologize on that. But we're going to power through. This is episode 49 for those of you that have been like sticking around and listening to all the podcasts. So it's grown from 1 to 49 very quickly. And it's been a lot of fun and looking forward to catching up with you, Easton. I know we connected initially. So you're at WVU, which we'll come back to that. You're not gonna be there much longer. But we'll come back to that here in a little bit. But we connected back in the winter because there was an opportunity potentially for you to come out and help us down a little bit at Fairmont, which I think would have still been awesome to be able to work out. Weren't able to make it work just for various reasons. But I have been then following you on social media. And how long has it been since you really started kind of putting some stuff out there? It's been a couple months, right?
Yeah, it's probably been like a month and a half, 2 months that I started posting again. And then I did stuff like way back when I was private sector, but that was like 6 years ago that I was posting then.
Yeah. So you kind of came back across my radar when you started posting this stuff, and you were kind of chopping away at some of the same questions that I've had or I'm going to have, because we also, like I told you on the phone the other day, we just added vault and force plates. So we're in very much the infancy, which is a very similar situation where you guys were last year, a couple years back. And I want to be able to make sure that we hit the ground running. So I'm super excited for this because as much as I'm a strength coach, like I'm also like a nerd at heart. Like, you know what I mean? Like
you got to wear
biology,
all the hats.
a sports science nerd at heart as well. So I'm excited to kind of pick your brain and for everybody else kind of hear what you're doing. So again, thanks for getting on here. I know your schedule's probably gonna be crazy the next couple of weeks, so I appreciate your time.
No, it's always good to get on.
What was your current role, current title, current role at WVU? And then we'll probably come back to the Auburn stuff later, but what is your next stop in your coaching journey?
Yeah, so for West Virginia, my current title is assistant strength and conditioning coach. So pretty basic. And then my title when I get down to Auburn is going to be assistant director of athletic performance. Similar position, similar responsibilities across both. Here at West Virginia, I've got swim and dive, and then I've got women's volleyball. Down at Auburn, I'm going to have swim. I'll oversee dive, but a part-time will be doing a lot of the programming for that. And then I'll have women's gymnastics.
Yeah. I got you. We kind of the other day when we talked on the phone, like you've worked with a multitude of other sports. Let's kind of dig into your background a little bit. So, I mean, you can work backwards or you can work, earliest to most recent, jobs and positions and responsibilities that you've had, but kind of dig into it however you want and kind of lay out your career for us.
Yeah. So I'll kind of start way back in the past. So back when I was doing my undergrad, it was like 2015 or so when this was happening. I was getting close to finishing my undergrad. It was actually in sociology. I was convinced I was going to go into social work and I was going to do like therapy, something like that. And then right before about a semester or two before I graduated, I ended up getting a job as a personal trainer just to kind of help pay the bills, and instantly fell in love with that and was like, I want to be in weight rooms and working in this kind of an environment like for the rest of my life. So made a big pivot there. Still graduated with my sociology degree, but then really didn't use it. Jumped straight into just like personal training at chain gyms. From there, I broke off and went independent, started doing my own thing, and then went from kind of working with a bodybuilding and aesthetic type population to transitioning more towards athletics as I started to just get a couple personal training clients that were like youth athletes, high school and below in age. So started working with them. And then just went out, got a CSCS on my own after about 3 years of being a personal trainer. Started using that to pick up more athletic training clients and started my own athletic performance business. I ran that for a few years, and that was back when I was living in Utah. And then from there, I did that for how many years? Probably like 3 years, and then decided to go back and get a master's degree. Got that in strength and conditioning. And that's what propelled me into the college athletics realm. So upon getting my master's degree, I went down to LSU. Pretty big move, but just to do an internship. And I decided it was worth making that move just to kind of build some connections, get up to a high level school and kick the door wide open as much as I could. So moved down to Louisiana. I was there for about 8 months, and then that's where I was able to finally get a full-time position, and that was working here at West Virginia. Been here for 2 years, and then just recently accepted a job with Auburn.
Nice. Where did you get your master's degree from?
Liberty University.
Oh, okay. Like, and did you come? You were doing that in person, or did you do that? They have an online one, correct?
Yeah, I did like a hybrid program, so
Yeah,
most of it was online, but like sports science stuff, I had to go out over the summer, and we did a couple weeks of classes.
yeah, they got a really solid program. I know. So it's actually ironic. I was telling you off air before. I had a podcast yesterday with Amanda Hunley now, and that's where she went to undergrad at. So it's kind of like small world,
But
kind of coincidence
yeah,
thing. So no, that's cool. For the LSU position, who like what teams like when you first went down there for as an intern, what teams was that with? Who was kind of your mentor down there?
yeah. So I mean, it was actually a really lucky coincidence. I just I started reaching out to a bunch of schools to get my master's. I had the choice between doing a master's thesis or doing 200 hours of internship time. And they said if you want to actually get in the field and work, that we recommend doing the internship time. So I just started reaching out to big schools, trying to find directors, things like that, see if there was any positions available. And I was like so disconnected from the college world at that time. I didn't realize most schools actually have like internship programs. So I just started like cold calling people and sending emails. And I actually I emailed Mel at LSU, their director, and she passed my email along to Katie Guillory. And that just happened to work out well because Katie also got her master's degree from Liberty University. So we did the same program just a couple years apart. So she saw it, was like, okay, I know what this guy knows, like know all the classes he's taken. And they were like, are you sure you want to move down here and do this internship and move across the country? You're not going to get paid to do this. And I had a bit of savings built up from like everything I'd done before. And I'm like, yeah, I think it's worth the investment. So Katie's been a huge mentor to me because she was the one that like is running their internship program, basically accepted me into it. I got down there and then I've been able to brush shoulders with a lot of other great coaches while I was there. So like Ashley Kowalewski, or AK as most people know her, Dustin Decree, Jack Erickson. So lots of people I've been able to kind of get to know while at LSU. I worked all sorts of sports while I was there. Um, they kind of just used me for anything that needed an extra hand because I really came in not just like as a standard intern where it's like you just got out of school, you really haven't put boots on the ground yet. I'd been doing it for like 9 years of like actually training. So I showed up and they were instantly kind of like, oh, you kind of know how to run a weight room. You like I just hadn't worked with that size of teams really, and that was the only real difference. So they were able to utilize me pretty quick with most of their sports.
Right. Another like shows you how small the coaching world is. So again, I don't really know Katie, but she was like one of the main speakers at Summer Strong this past year.
Yeah.
Talking about just kind of her. I'm not going to get into it. People do their own research, but she had a pretty crazy accident and had to get her leg
Yep.
amputated, so people can look into that. But she obviously an amazing like inspirational presentation, and then I don't know what she ended up deadlifting, but I think she hit a deadlift PR later in the deadlift party at
Yeah,
Summer
she
Strong,
did.
which is again always pretty cool. So it's cool that you have that network. One name that I was curious to hear if you said it was Bush Exnader. Was he? Did
Okay.
you cross paths with him at all? Because he's somebody that again I look up to just from like his speed development, his power development philosophy. I mean, I don't know Boo, but I mean he's a guy that anytime I see a YouTube video or he's on a podcast, like I'm listening to it. Were you able to kind of get around him at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually out to lunch with Katie, and Coach Boo was there, and we were having conversations, and they were kind of talking about gymnastics and working like getting down to the vault, sprint mechanics, things like that, and how it might apply to gymnasts. But I was able to be part of that conversation. And then having brushed shoulders with him, I actually ended up applying for the track job at LSU as soon as my internship was coming to an end. And so I actually spent a good deal of time talking to Coach Boo on the phone and just kind of getting some of his thoughts on how to approach track at a school where he had a lot of involvement with that. And those conversations have actually been very impactful, just the way he approached things and the way he views like long-term college athlete development. And the way he tapers like volume because of the increased capability for intensity and power production in his athletes, I thought was like brilliant. And so that's something I try and apply is as your athletes become more powerful over time, you can really kind of start, or you kind of need to scale them back in the amount of volume they're doing because every rep has that much more wear and tear and almost like internal damage on the joints. And he pointed out that like a lot of track athletes kind of show a lot of promise right as they get into college and can start to fizzle as they hit like their sophomore and junior year. And a lot of that has to do with like injuries and like nagging things showing up. And he's like, it's because no one's tapering their intensity. They're almost adding more because they're more proficient at lifting. And he's like, you almost have to go the opposite direction of what you would assume. So great conversations with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, honestly, no, we've had that conversation. Again, I don't really think we run into that issue at Fairmont all that much. Not because we don't have good athletes, but just because their training age isn't like, he's getting elite level college. He's getting elite level track athletes that are borderline Olympic level athletes by the time they even get to LSU. And he's just basically fine tuning them. I mean, the analogy that I always give is like, if you're driving like a Honda Accord, like you can run that thing hard like every day and it's going to run forever. You change the oil, rotate the tires, you're going to be fine. But like once you get with those elite level athletes, their output is just so much higher. Like anything that they do is redlining. So you have to like be cautious. Again, I haven't worked with very, very, very few of those. Mainly only probably the NFL combine facility that I worked at. But it's something where like it doesn't, an outsider's perspective be like, well, they're the highest level athletes. They can probably handle the most load. It's like, yeah, but they're also so like so fine tuned and so like high threshold, like that they're just everything they do, they're redlining. Like every rep that they do is just so much more like CNS dominant. Like they're a Ferrari that you don't just take your Ferrari to the grocery store. Like if you're going to drive your Ferrari, like you're trying to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. You're not just taking it for a freaking, drive to the grocery store and back.
Yeah, no, I've always thought very similarly, but instead of sports cars, I've thought about it as like work trucks. But I did that for a long side quest while I was private sector. But the more load you're pulling, the more stress on your transmission, the faster that thing's going to give out. Whereas if you just have a daily driver like Ford F-150, thing's going to be fine for quite a while. But you start loading it up on a trailer, and it's like that transmission burns down quick. And I view that as those athletes, they've got a significantly greater amount of load on them.
Yeah. You mentioned gymnastics and like we have acrobatics and tumbling. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that sport. But essentially a lot of our girls are, and I did a whole episode. I interviewed the Baylor strength coach. So Baylor's like the number one, Courtney Tompkins. The Baylor's like the number one Division I A&T program. We're basically the number one Division II A&T program. But we still compete at the same national championships and all that. Anyway, I was talking to her and we were essentially talking about the same thing. Like we're asking these girls to do some of the craziest shit because it's all girls that were either former like competitive cheer or former competitive gymnasts, and we're just asking them to do crazy shit. I saw this thing. Actually, one of our former A&T athletes sent this to me, in the idea that when they're doing like I forget what the pass was, but a very standard gymnastics pass, they're exerting like up to 14 times body weight.
Yeah.
And yet we are blown away. And again, I'm always disappointed with an injury, but we're blown away and we're heartbroken and we act like we're surprised when they rupture an Achilles or when they tear an ACL. And again, I always preface this and say like, that's not to say that we still don't strive for injury mitigation. Like we strive for that. We try to build resiliency. We try to do that. But there's literally zero things that we can do in the weight room that's going to induce up to 14 times body weight, right? It's not possible in the millisecond time frame that they're doing. And even sprinting, like going back to like Boo, like his elite level sprinters are probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times body weight every time their foot hits the ground and, a quarter of a second or faster. There's literally zero things we can do in the weight room. So my point of bringing all that up is what is like, when you think of gymnastics, cause I know this is going to be new for you. So maybe they asked you this in the interview. When you think of gymnastics and you think of just, I put it up there with like wrestling. It's one of those sports where the sport itself is so stressful to the body. And so the only way to get better at gymnastics is to do gymnastics. Like you can make a wide receiver in football faster without a football being in sight. Right. But a gymnast like has to be on the bars. They have to be doing the vault. They have to be, they have to be on the beam. Like how are you going to approach that in terms of just their athletic development, potential injury mitigation? Like, what is your approach going to be with that? And I think you've said you mentioned you've worked with obviously gymnasts in the past and stuff. So what does that kind of
Yeah.
look like in terms of your athletic development for them?
Yeah, I feel like, not to overly simplify it, but in a lot of ways, like my first thought is it's going to be similar to most sports. In that there's going to be a lot of like overuse injuries and just repetitive movements that start to wear on the body because you're doing the same thing over and over and over. And especially when you're doing it with like that high a force, it's, I mean,
Hey, I lost your voice. I don't know. I lost your sound. I'm not sure what happened.
oh, is it? Can you hear me?
There. Yeah, we're good. Maybe like
Okay.
just repeat that last sentence that you said.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all good.
Yes. So essentially, I view it as being like just addressing overuse injuries, and when you have like that much force going in, you're going to adapt that much quicker to it. And so you can see like there's like going to be postural things like that, where it's like the base structure that you're working with has adapted, whether for the better or for the worse, to make it so the athlete can perform in that sport. And I think that leads to a lot of the injuries that you're going to end up seeing. I feel the same way about other sports, like with the swim teams I've worked with. It's like lots of kyphosis in the upper back, things like that. Whereas gymnastics, it's going to be like lordosis in the lower back, and then you're going to see like very flat feet. They're good adaptations for helping you perform in the sport, but that also can lead to up the chain issues or down the chain issues. And so by just trying to add some sort of counterbalance to it and making sure you're training those opposing muscles and opening things back up as much as possible. And I've had this conversation with Coach Katie, who is LSU's gymnastics coach, and I was helping her, and that's where I got quite a few of these ideas, was observing. And you're never going to be able to completely fix those problems. Like the amount of time you have in a weight room, especially with gymnasts, where it's like you can't work them out all day, every day, especially with what they're doing for their sport. You're normally going to get like 30 minutes, if that, a couple of times a week with them. You can't outdo the hours of practice they're putting in every day. But I don't think that's a reason that we shouldn't attempt to, or at least throw some sort of stimulus to try and correct that. And so I'm really big, like with all of my sports, on like trying to add in mobility and sneak that in the door whenever I can. So I love to do a kind of a like supple leopard, Kelly Starrett style mobility type training where it's not static stretching, but I find you can mix that kind of dynamic aspect in and use that as a lot of the rest periods, rather than just having them sit around and wait. And I think that gives you good outputs in different ways. It's like you're giving them appropriate rest time so you can get more intensity out of the actual lifting you are doing. And when you're able to get more intensity, that means you can scale back the volume, which for a gymnast, that's going to be huge. More intensity, lower volume, I think is really the only way to successfully get a gymnast to respond to working out. Whereas if you just start throwing tons of volume at them, you're just adding more wear and tear to joints that are already just screaming. So get it done quick and effective, but then throw in some sort of like mobility. And this is kind of like I guess a large philosophy point for me in general is I know a lot of people will string like mobility, stretching, things like that at the end of the workout because they don't want it to reduce power output, because we've all seen those studies where it's like, oh, it can reduce like jumping effectiveness unless you go
Right.
re-warm up and all of that.
Right.
That's where I try and keep it dynamic, but in my head, I try and weigh pros and cons. And I'm like, if it does reduce our power output, but we're in a very power-based sport, I think we're getting plenty of power stimulus. So I think I'm willing to sacrifice just a little bit of that power output while we're lifting. If I can have them come in and we can do a quick mobilization and then they go back and do the next set. So I like to use the example of squats. Like if someone is lacking ankle mobility and they can't get down, and this is going to be huge with gymnasts, they have terrible dorsiflexion, whereas they can plantar flex like no one's business. If they can't get down into a squat and you need them to be able to get down there because that's where they kind of land, I think if you have them mobilize a bit in between sets and then they go back and hit their next set of squats, they start to reform the motor program in their own head. Whereas if you do the stretching at the end of the day, they don't get the immediate application. So the brain does not process how this applies to the motor program of squatting, stabilization, etc. And you have to hope that they carry that through till the next time they come in. I think that is a pipe dream. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think like you've worked with college athletes, you've got a very limited window from instruction to application before it goes into the fishbowl or to the goldfish brain and it disappears and goes out. So I think by bringing that in and making it so you're constantly trying to overwrite motor programs to help them become more effective at basic movements, that's one of the best ways you can try and help mitigate injuries.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. And that's something that we do as well. We kind of like if we're doing like whether it's in like what we kind of call our power complex, we know we're doing like a clean or a jerk or a snatch, we'll do like some sort of trunk stability exercise paired with that. And then we'll do some sort of like, it might be like a 90-90 hip switch. It might be, an ankle and some sort of ankle range of motion thing. It might be a half knee, like a hip flexor hamstring rock. I'm with you on that with the Kelly Starrett stuff in terms of trying to mobilize the joint in the moment. Because the thing is, especially if you put it on the end, like I feel like anything you put into the lift after about the first 30 minutes is the athletes are already starting to check out for the most part anyways. So like you want to try to stack all of your most important things at the beginning. And honestly, the athletes most of the time, like they know they need to stretch, but unless somebody's forcing them to do it, like they're not going to do it. So, one thing that we use a lot, we use like a lot of the FRC principles. So doing our hip cars, shoulder cars, spinal rotations, like spinal segmentation. I would like to work in more of like our the pails and rails, something we have done, but not as much as I would like to. Again, that's a lot of that's just a buy-in. Like you said, kind of that goldfish brain of we're just constantly reminding kids how to do good shoulder cars to maintain and build a little bit of robustness through the joints. Is that something that you also do? Do you use any like FRC or anything like that from a mobility development standpoint, especially like with swimmers and things like that?
Yeah, I've actually used a good deal of that, like FRC and like the pails and rails, with my volleyball athletes. Their hips get really messed up, especially like the jumpers, and then also like you run into a lot of the same kind of ankle mobility issues. And so being able to use like pails and rails to try and help get those ankles moving the way they're supposed to and help them really kind of tap in. Like if you're looking at like a jumping sport and you have a dysfunctional ankle, that's 1/3 of your triple extension that is not doing what it's supposed to do. And then if you throw in any sort of dysfunction in the hip as well, well, now you're jumping from one of the three, and that's your knees. And one of the biggest issues with any jumper is jumper's knee. And I'm like, so in a weird way, I kind of view this almost like powerlifting, where it's like I was listening to like Louis Simmons stuff back in the day, and he was talking about how like everyone blows out their shoulder and their pec when they're benching, but how many people really injure their tricep? And he's like, well, you gotta, if you can load the tricep more, you can make that a bigger part of it. Then you protect the other two joints and you put it on something that almost never gets injured, or at least not as frequently. And I view that same thing is like, I look at jumpers, I look at gymnasts, and I say like, okay, if this joint is constantly getting beat up, how can we try and shift that stress and make it so it's shared over multiple joints rather than just being on one? And if you can kind of, again, like start messing with that motor program a little bit, and make it so their brain starts to do that intuitively, I think then it starts to show up in their sport, and you're helping them stay healthy by helping them spread that load out over a greater surface rather than just throwing it all into one direct area.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's something else too that like I bring up all the time. And if you have an athlete, I'm one of those where injuries frustrate me, but I also have come to grips with the fact that they're just part of it. They're just part, especially as we drive up performance, we're increasing the risk of injury. That's just part of it, because the athletes their output's higher. Again, goes back to driving a Honda Accord versus driving like a Lamborghini. That Lamborghini is gonna, if you run it red line, it's gonna blow out on you, right? Versus a Honda Accord, you can run that thing all day and it's never gonna blow out, right? Just the performance model. Um, One thing that I'm big on, and you mentioned this with the gymnasts, is like I really, really wonder how many of our ankle, knee, hip, even low back injuries, hamstring strains. I wonder how much of that is the foot, the big toe. Cal Dietz is big on like the big toe, the spring ankle complex. And again, we try to dabble, we try to sprinkle as much of that kind of stuff in as possible. One of our biggest things that I feel is a big bang for our buck is we just get our kids training without shoes on. Like that might be the only 2 or 3 hours out of the week where they don't have shoes on. They don't have some squishy like cloud that they're walking on all day, every day. I mean, again, we don't have to go deep down that rabbit hole, but you mentioned like, okay, if their ankle doesn't work, if their hip doesn't work, okay, well now it's going to affect the knee. And I'm like, okay, well, what if even below the ankle, what if their foot just doesn't work? Like, what if their foot doesn't hinge where it's supposed to hinge at, right? What if it doesn't pivot where it's supposed to pivot at? What if everything's so stuck in the foot? And I know even Kelly Starrett has that in some level, like foot distractions and things like that, big toe mobilizations, right?
Yeah.
And we used to do that when I was with the Rockies. We would make guys like learn how to play the piano with their but not actually play the piano, but we called it playing the piano with their toes. And that's like an FRC thing, right? You maybe mobilize the big toe, have to move the other four, stabilize the big toe, have to move, or stabilize the other four, have to move the big toe like by itself. And it's something where like you'll see big league players that literally the big toe doesn't move. Like it is stuck because they're just always in baseball cleats and always in, hey dudes or whatever the hell it is. Like it's kind of mind blowing how dysfunctional the thing that interacts with the ground is on most humans.
Yeah.
I don't know. That just might be having a statement. You can have any feedback to that you want.
No, I mean, I think about like every sport I can think of because I mean, to your point of like just wiggling the toes, I remember it was like last season for volleyball. We were sitting in the athletic training room and I was watching the girls as they were sitting there just messing with each other, trying to just spread their toes out. Like, can you just get your toes to flare? And one of them could, but she also grew up doing a lot more barefoot stuff, like kind of like more of like out on a ranch, running around, kind of wild child, you know. And all the other ones, it's like they never really did any barefoot things. They've always been in shoes. And like you start looking at like anything like that, it's like you look at like ballerinas, their feet are just destroyed. You look at gymnasts, they've got the flattest soles you've ever seen. You look at basketball players, and it's like same thing. All those shoes come to a point, and it's just jacking up the way your foot mobile or moves. And I think if you start with something that foundational and you create dysfunction there, this is like you're just going to spread that dysfunction up because your body is going to be good. And so I can't remember where I heard this. I wish I could attribute to them. I'd have to look it up, but someone said like the best athletes are the best compensators, and that's why they can play through pain, discomfort, all of that. And so as I look at that, I'm like, well, if you start with the foundation and you're going to have to compensate for that, you're going to spread that compensation up through the entire body. And one thing I always love to do with whether this was personal training clients or athletes to kind of show them why it's important to be mobile and moving around is I love taking the idea, I call it old man syndrome, where it's like we've all seen that old guy with a walker and it's like kyphosis, like hunched over, barely moving, hips tucked underneath, all of that. And I love telling people, I'm like, pick a joint and we'll pretend there's dysfunction in that joint. And it's very rare they pick something like the wrist. They always pick like knees, ankles, things that are hurting on them. And you can show how if that stops moving, the way you compensate eventually leads other joints to compensate as well, upstream, downstream, to make up for what is lacking in the original joint. And I find that like no matter what, you always end up over a long enough period of time in old man syndrome, where you're just hunched over and you can barely move. And I'm like, so if you want to avoid that, you can start at the top of the stream and try and force the dysfunction down and out, but it's like if you get rid of it at its root cause, that's going to be a lot more effective, and then you can kind of pull the function back up through the stream. And I think there's times to kind of deal with more like acute stresses, like midway through that stream, but like the more you can get down to the root cause, and I think a lot of that's got to come from the foot, foot and ankle.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's funny you said the old man syndrome. Like, I don't know if this was like Dan John or Pavel or somebody that I used to read and listen to a lot of their stuff back in the day, like early on in my career. They talk about how you come into the world in the fetal position, you leave the world in the fetal position. It's how long can you, like as a baby, you're going from fetal position to everything needs to be extended, right? You got to be able to extend your head, extend your shoulders, extend your hips, extend your ankles to be able to walk and crawl and all that. And then it's like as you get older, everything on the front side of your body gets tight, right? Your shoulders get round, your hip flexors get tight, your hamstrings get long and weak, right? Versus like most of what we should do. And if you think of like most people like working their mirror muscles, they're doing everything shortening you into this, like you said, that old man position. Versus we probably need to spend more time working on those extensions and posterior chain. Which again, obviously, I think most coaches know that, but just thinking about it in that context of like developmental biology of hey, you come into the world in a fetal position, and then as you develop, everything spreads out this way, and then as you get older and you stop moving and stop moving in 3 dimensions, like everything goes back to that root situation. You kind of mentioned this a second ago. So I want to give you a chance to elaborate on it. What is your, like you as Easton Nelson, the strength coach, what is your like overarching philosophy as a coach, as for strength and conditioning, like as a person, for athlete? Like you can answer that however you want to answer it, as broad or as straightforward as you want. Like how do you, like you can even say like what's your mission statement, like however you want to answer it. I just think it's cool to like give people a chance to kind of let other people know like what their perspective is as a strength coach.
Yeah, I mean, I guess looking back to kind of like my history of becoming a strength coach will help describe a lot of where I come from on this. Because again, I thought I was going to go into social work. I thought I was going to be a therapist, all of that, like with sociology, because I care profoundly about the people around me. And I've always wanted to make a positive impact in people's lives. And that's why I was looking at that as a career, is I'm like, you can go and you can have a big effect on people. And then when I started building my own athletic performance business, I realized like, hey, I can take these sociological principles and I can take the language or the medium of sports and smash them together. And now in especially like when you look at like things like high school kids and those younger kids, we're stubborn at that age. Every single one of us is. Like, how many movies and books have been made about like the idea that like teenagers are stubborn and they don't get like they don't see eye to eye with their parents, they're trying to find themselves. It's hard to speak that language and find a way to communicate with them in such a way that they're okay.
Yeah, you're good.
I don't know what's going on with our Wi-Fi today, but
No, it's all
sorry
good.
about that.
Mine went out the other day when I was doing one of these, so you're good. We'll keep it rolling.
All right. But yeah, so I mean, basically, like trying to speak a language that kids understand and like, which is something like sports, and saying like, if I can talk to you in this way and then take life lessons and all these principles and try and make an effect there, it's something that people are going to understand and mesh with a lot better than me like sitting there and lecturing someone from the front of a room. And so I found that it was a way for me to kind of fulfill everything I wanted to do, but also do it in an enjoyable way. And so then I kind of pulled that forward. And then brought that into like college athletics. And I'm like, I still believe I can make an impact in some of the most pivotal years in people's life. And that's what I aspire to do. And that's kind of like the deep driving thing. Like, I love strength and conditioning and I love helping people perform better. But I also believe that you're only as good of an athlete as you are as good of a person. Like, especially when you're looking at team sports. Like, if you are a terrible person, it's really hard to function as part of a team and have people buy in and trust you and have coaches know they can rely on you. All of that gets more difficult if you like can't take personal accountability, you shift blame to other people, you're disagreeable, hard to work with. And so I find that by helping people and focusing on the person first, and I think that's kind of like, I mean, you look at like John Wooden, things like that. It's not a new idea I'm coming up with. It's like people have been doing this, but that's part of where I got it is I feel like a lot of the coaches I look up to, whether they're sport coaches, strength coaches, whatever, they start with the person. And in college athletics, we always say like it's student athlete, and we emphasize that student comes first. I tell people in job interviews all the time, I view it as person student athlete. Like, you have to see the person before you see the student. Did my phone just do it or my computer just do it again?
Yeah, you're good. I mean, it's fine though. You're good. But what you were
Okay.
saying, where you left off was, person, student, athlete. So if you want to just, yeah, can go back to that, that'd be great. I think I lost you again.
All right. I tried to just switch you over to a different Wi-Fi connection, so I think that should fix it.
Okay. Yeah, you're good.
All right. Sorry, you were saying though?
Person, student, athlete, which I love. So just keep
Yeah.
going on that because that's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, basically like trying to dig deeper and do more than just like physical performance. And I again, I don't think that's anything that's new or uncommon. I think it's something that a lot of people have been trying to do. But yeah, I've kind of adopted that as also like one of my big philosophies. Um, and then on top of that, like I also believe like, I mean, it's a lot of the soft skills that I feel like people kind of overlook or don't value. Like, especially in our field, we're so big on like hard skills. Can you do the sports science? Can you program effectively? Can you coach a floor? All of that. And we kind of, I think, undervalue soft skills currently. And I think those are going to make a big comeback. But with that, it's like, I mean, I know if you apply for a strength and conditioning job and all you talk about is how you're passionate about the job, like you're not going to get that job because like everyone's passionate. But I do believe there is something to be like, just how passionate are you? Like, how much do you love this? Can you demonstrate in a way that you want this more than other people? And if you take that and apply it to athletes, it's like, yeah, you want to be a good athlete. Everyone wants to be a good athlete. Like, I've never met like a kid that didn't say they wanted to like become a professional athlete, professional musician, whatever. We all have these aspirations. but somewhere along the way we lose it. And so I'm like, I look at that and say, like, how can we keep you passionate about this? How can we help you find that enjoyment? How can we help you enjoy the process? Because the process is what makes or breaks someone. Um, so I know that may not be like a super direct answer to what you're looking for, but like I just believe in like trying to build those qualities in people as like the base level and then give them everything I can in the strength and conditioning realm, almost as a secondary thing, even though I know that's like my primary job. I think you have to start a little deeper.
Yeah, I think it's great. I completely agree with you, and I think it's you know again, I've said this before on the podcast. Like that's the one, not flaw, but the one drawback to like my situation at Fairmont, where like I'm in charge of so many athletes and I don't get I get them impact a lot of kids and have that positive influence on their lives and on their performance. And that may be, sometimes that might be a 1%, sometimes that might be 20% influence, but I also don't get to have that, like I don't get to go eat lunch with them. I don't get to see them in the cafeteria. I don't, what I mean, I don't get to go on road trips with them. And so it's just a little different. It's again, it's the pros and the cons of it.
Yeah.
And I think you have to understand that whatever coaching job you're getting, you have to understand what those pros and cons are. But I completely agree with you. And we talk about that. Even the way that I think about programming is, I don't think about the sport at all. I think about them as a human being first. Like, and what does a functioning human being need to have, right? Physically, and then obviously you're tying into a little bit more of the emotional and the psychological aspect. And it's funny because you said you want to be a social worker. Man, there's some times where being a strength coach, you're still working as a social worker. Like that shit's there's some
100%.
real shit sometimes that you find out and stuff, and more so than you don't even need to know sometimes. Like I got some stories when I was in pro baseball of some stuff that I can't, I
Yeah.
definitely don't want to repeat it on here, but man, there was some shit I know about some guys
Nah,
that played pro baseball that no one else really needed to know.
yeah.
No, I
Well,
appreciate that answer. Go ahead.
for sure. Well, I think people just are willing to open up to you. And I mean, of course, I saw that a lot like in personal training. Like you become like those people's best friends. And I find that like being open and available like that in strength and conditioning, like I've had people rely on me like during personal crises and things like that in a way where it's like I have sports psych say like I've never seen someone call a strength coach in a situation like that before. And I'm like, just trying to be open, just trying to be like a good person people can rely on because I care about them. And on that note, it's like I do believe you have to bring some of that into your programming. Like if you can understand the person and what drives them and what makes them tick, you can program more effectively for that person because the most effective exercise in the world, if that person doesn't believe in it, is scared of it, or has something that's going to make it so they're holding back, it's no longer the most effective exercise for that individual. And so if you have someone that hates the weight room and you're like, okay, let's go out there and do heavy cleans or heavy snatches, that person's not going to respond well to that because they're going to be guarded. They're going to be a little bit nervous about it. And if you had them do like a heavy kettlebell swing or something instead, they might get way more bang for their buck because they feel safer. Or if you have someone that's like an anxious personality type, there's studies out there that show like doing primer sessions are significantly more effective when you have an anxious personality type over non-anxious. And so just knowing how you can kind of tweak and add and try and give a little bit more of yourself to like individualize as much as possible. And again, see the person and not just the athlete or the number. I think that really opens it up to where you can get way more buy-in. And I think buy-in is pivotal for getting success and results.
Yeah, 100%. Like that's the whole idea of the best program on paper doesn't mean shit if you can't coach it and you can't get the athletes to buy into it. So
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. And again, I think the soft skills, like you said, soft skills probably go unnoticed and undiscussed probably more than what they should. And with that being said, we are going to switch over to some hard skill stuff.
All right.
So kind of going back on the conversation we had on the phone the other day, can you just like, and you can start from as much of a background on sports science as you want. You can just pick up from kind of what you've been doing the last couple months with the Volley force plates. But I definitely want to make sure that we touch on kind of like your three testing like buckets. And
Yeah.
I'm forgetting the one. I know one was like performance, one was technique. I'm not sure if the other one was the other one, like
Like
readiness,
health.
health.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
So
health and output.
definitely want to make sure that you kind of touch on those, and then I'll probably have some follow-up questions on each one of those. But really just kind of like almost reiterate what you were telling me about the other day on the phone, because I think it's a good place to start in terms of just for other coaches. Because again, my hope is that the people that listen to this are also going to be in a similar situation as me and as you at some point in their career where they're like being, this sports science stuff is being thrown at them. Hey, it's like, hey, here's all this thousands of dollars technology. You have to figure out a way to implement it into what you're doing, which again, I think is good, but how can we concisely and effectively do that and still benefit the athletes? Because at the end of the day, if you're just having them jump and you're not really utilizing that to make them improve performance and improve who they are as a human and as an athlete, it really doesn't matter. So
Yeah.
however you want to attack that, like that's a very open-ended question, but however you want to attack just kind of what you've been doing, what your background is and what your approach to, especially more so in the force plate world, but all of sports science.
All right. Um, here comes a very weird approach to that. But this is, I'm just going to explain how I think about it is, so I love music, like absolutely love music, love playing guitar, things like that. And I once watched a master class with Carlos Santana, fantastic guitar player. And he was saying the first thing people need to learn how to do is play a single note. And it's like, well, obviously, but he's like, no, don't just like pluck the string. He's like, how many ways can you play that same note? Can you play it in different positions? Can you add some sort of effect to it? Can you play it loud? Can you play it soft? Can you play it quick? Can you play it slow? How many ways can you use that same tool or that same piece? And I look at that as coming from private sector where I was working out of bodybuilding gyms with a lot of machines, not as much free weight and nowhere near as much space. And I was trying to train athletes out of that facility. And that's what I did for a long time. I had limited resources, the same way you might only have one note available. And I had to start thinking, how can I use this creatively? How can I use a kettlebell, not just for lifting, but how can I use it for mobilization? Can I use it to like smash and scrub sore joints and or sore muscles, things like that? How creative can I get with each piece of equipment? And then working there, I had no tech. Like my jump testing was I put chalk on your hand, you jump and touch as high as you can on the wall, and I'm going to measure it later and I'll let you know what you got. Um, it very, very bare bones. And I think getting proficient at that was kind of my first introduction to sports science. Is it was, if you can call it science. Um, but yeah, like I was trying to measure something, trying to have some sort of testing with, again, like no tech. I didn't even have a jump mat. And going from there, saying like, okay, how can I use results? And even if I know this is not going to be 100% precise, how can I use this to guide decisions rather than just collecting a number to try and prove to people on Instagram that I can help people jump higher? I'm like, what is this going to tell me? And then from there, get into the college world, and all of a sudden I get down to LSU and I go from zero tech to LSU level tech. And I was like, what do I do with all these wonderful toys? And that's where it's like I started trying to read about the different pieces of technology, look into force plates, look into the different brands, say like, how can I use this effectively? The same way I used to look at like a kettlebell and say, how can I use this in multiple ways? What can I do with it that might be unconventional but might be helpful? And I started doing that with force plates. I started doing that with Nordboard, looking at whatever I could and saying, what are all the possibilities of use with this thing? And then going from there and trying to validate it in that way. And so we talked on the phone the other day about how uh, we both use Sparta plates, and those are coming and or kind of fading away a little bit. You don't see them as often, but something that I liked is that they would give you load, drive, and explode scores and basically break down any jumping into the three phases of a plyometric. And I loved having kind of an aggregate score for that because it told me what aspect of the jump is strong and what aspect is not. And starting in the private sector, I very much focused just on the output. Just how high can you jump? I didn't really look as much into how are you producing that jump. And then the idea of load, drive, and explode scores really kind of opened up my mind to saying like, instead of just looking at what they did, look at how they did it. And so then I started digging into those metrics, and I started trying to, when I got to West Virginia, I didn't have Sparta plates. We actually had Hawken plates to start with, and that's not going to give you load, drive, explode numbers. And I really liked that, so I started trying to create systems where I could like pick variables and create my own scores, whether it was Z scores or things like that. And I tried a bunch of different methods, but just in that process of saying like, well, this is not something that's done with this plate, but I kind of want to make this happen because I like an aspect of another piece of tech. It allowed me to really try and dig in and say like, okay, what metrics would be important for measuring just the load things? because you get so much information off all these pieces of tech, and most of us are not using actually, we're not using like a tenth of the information they spit out. And so I'm like, how can I more effectively use this before I just start bringing in more pieces of technology? Upon like looking through all of that, like I came up with like kind of 3 different buckets, and now this is kind of how I measure jumps, especially with like my volleyball team, is I've picked like 20 major metrics for jumping that I think are important and kind of describe the jump in a way I can comprehend. And I've separated them into output level metrics, and those are going to be essentially like, what did the athlete produce? It's going to be a lot of like MRSI, it's going to be jump height, just things like that, like just your simple output. And then I have technique level variables from there. That's going to tell me a lot more about like, how did they do this? That's going to be like contraction time, it's going to be counter movement depth, it's anything like that that just gives me a little bit of an insight as to what went into producing this jump. And then from there, I also have health level metrics, and that's going to be things like asymmetry, things that are going to tell me like, is this athlete going to be at a higher risk of injury due to there being imbalances, et cetera. So using those, I try, that's kind of how I come up now with like a jump fingerprint. I guess if you want, actually, let me share my jump dashboard really quick, because it might be easier to kind of see this while we're talking through some of it.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I'm kind of like, I like the vault plates. I think they're super easy. One thing I'm kind of butting heads with them right now is because, again, we just don't have the same like time. We just have more, it seems like more strict time constraints with getting our data turned around. And like one thing that I'm disappointed in is like, I can't just export like percent change difference on there. Like I have to export the raw data and then put it into like a Google sheet and then have to, do all that. Like what have you found while you're looking at it? What is you've like, what is your process in terms of getting all of those 20 metrics downloaded into a CSV, uploaded? Like, is that what you're doing? You're literally just downloading and then doing like a big data dump and then having this kind of built out?
So this has been a long time kind of in the making. So what you can see here, you'll see that I've like blinded all the names. I give everyone codes, like VB004 is just one of the volleyball athletes.
Right. Yep.
The reason I do this is to build out this dashboard that I have here, and you can see like the different levels of metrics that I'm using. If we come over to like the data warehouse, like you can see there is ridiculous amounts over here. So this is not only Vault, this is also Hawkins information that's exported. So we transitioned just a few months ago from Hawkins to Vault. And that got me thinking a lot about like the metrics I was going to use. And that's what caused me to really kind of update to this current system and dashboard I'm using. So I'm a big proponent of using AI as a tool to make us better and more effective at what we do. And with its ability to process information, I find that I can save myself a ton of time doing things like this. So I described to AI what it is I wanted to accomplish. Like I want to see how we're jumping so I can have a targeted approach to kind of like slice very micro at like which of these technique metrics is going to make a big difference in how we're actually jumping. So I described that to AI. Then I was able to pull in like the Vault practitioner guide for using force decks. And then I was able to pull in, I also use like an athlete needs, I might go over that in a second, but like pulled in the practitioner guide. They also have a list that shows what metrics are the same and what metrics are measured differently or called something different between Vault and Hawken. And so since they already had that prepared, I was able to upload that as well. And then I put all of that into AI and I said like, okay, we're going to use this. I need you to function as a sports scientist. Let's talk about how to build a robust jump analysis system, knowing that we have to try and convert some of these metrics, or we're going to try and use all this together. So that's where I came up with like, okay, here are 20 metrics that I think are effective. And there is either a direct comparison between Hawken and Bald, or there's something that's close enough. And there are some that like they just don't translate at all. And so just kind of being able to familiarize myself with that was one of the first steps. And then from there, I was able to say like, okay, based on Bald's metrics that I now have, which of these do I think are the most important? And then how do I not lose all the legacy data that I built up by testing people on Hawkins for the past year and a half? And by doing that, that's where, like, if you look at the dashboard, you can see that I have this percentage versus baseline. Part of what makes it so I have output tier, technique tier, health tier is anything in the output tier is almost always going to be compared against the all-time best. A lot of these numbers are measured very, very similarly. Like jump height tends to be slightly different on Hawken and Vald, but a lot of it depends on if you're using like impulse momentum measurement or if you're using flight time, if you're using like how you're measuring it. So I brought that in. I understand that like typically I see that people jump about 1.5 inches to 2 inches higher when they're using Hawken. So just the way they're measuring it. So it's not a perfect comparison. I think it's close enough. If anything, I think it just makes the athletes hungry to jump what they were jumping. I don't think there's like any, I mean, it's not 100% precise. I think it's worth a little bit of a miss there. But a lot of the other ones, like peak power divided by body mass, that's just physics, right? That's just math. Like that cannot be changed in how you are measuring that. Whereas if you look at something like eccentric duration down in technique, those are drastically different between Vald and Hawken, where one of them will have a unweighting phase that is separate from their eccentric phase. And so if you start looking at things like impulses, which not to get like too nerdy into this, but that's like area underneath the curve. If you don't have the same curve because you don't include the unweighting phase, you now have a very different impulse measurement, and those cannot be compared in any way, shape, or form.
Yep.
So so with those, that's where I do comparison versus their percentage versus baseline is compared to season average. And I just make sure that we're not bringing in any Hawken data with that. That way I'm not trying to compare apples and oranges. I'm only comparing Vald.
Sorry, no, I think this is awesome. One thing that I'm wondering about, because we're gonna have no baseline data. So 2 questions for you, like right now, is how long do you feel like how many data points do you think it took before you felt like you started to actually have enough data to be able to compare, like to start kind of drawing some conclusions? And like we're gonna jump, like our football guys are gonna start using it. We're gonna jump them every single week of the season. But even with that, we only have 15 weeks of the season. So like, am I gonna be able to start making some changes to the program, recommendations to the training staff, recommendations to the sport coaches? Like, is it going to take me a month? Is it going to take me halfway through the season? That's the first question. And then the second question is, when you're doing the latest session compared to season average, are you factoring in the latest session into that average already?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's immediately factored in. So like you can see here, like latest session for concentric impulse is 5.26. That says 100% because all-time best was 5.26. So like that's immediately brought in. It would be brought into their season average as well.
Okay. All right. So then the first question of how, in your experience, how much data are we going to need? And it's probably never enough, but how much data, how much of a time frame do you think we're going to have until we actually can maybe start making some assumptions?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on what you're looking at. So like, I think you could jump someone once. And for example, I just got a couple new volleyball athletes just today that are starting. I'm going to jump them probably next Monday, and then we're going to go through and I'm going to have to look at their stuff and try and use it to draw and personalize for that individual. And I don't have legacy data for that individual. I only have one jump number. So I'm still going to do the same thing just with one jump, but I'm not going to be able to compare to season average or compare to all-time best. But what I can do is very much focus on the technique tier, because if they walk in, let's say I have one of them walk in and she only jumps 5 inches. I mean, that's abysmal. That's not like, especially for a volleyball player. But my question is going to be like, why are we only jumping 5 inches? And I'm going to go straight into the technique tier and I'm going to start looking at that and saying like, which of these numbers are different than what I'm used to seeing? And so with this, like I could say like, let's say VB004 is one of my new athletes, and we'll just take counter movement depth just because it's up at the top. So we're looking at like somewhere around 26.2 centimeters of depth on that squat. If I have someone come in and let's say VB008 is someone that I've had jumping for a long time, when I pull them up and I say, okay, well, this person gets down to 35 centimeters of depth, I can say, well, maybe this person is not getting low enough. And it allows me to immediately, and you can do a lot of that with your coaching eye. And I think that's what tells you kind of like where to start digging is if it looks and smells like shit, it kind of is. So start digging there before you go somewhere else. But you can start looking into some of those metrics and say like, okay, how does that look? I also am a big fan of like impulse ratios because then you can start saying, are you significantly better at concentric or eccentric impulse? And if you're significantly better at one or the other, then I know what your strengths are and I know where your weaknesses are. And I can actually kind of profile you kind of in that load drive explode idea is are you muscling your jump or are you just like all stretch shortening cycle and you're all tendons and you're just like long and lean and bouncy? Or are you like how are you approaching it? And then that tells me like if I'm off season, my goal is to attack their weaknesses and try and build that up and make it strong, right? So if you are I'll give you an example of two of my volleyball girls. One of them I referred to as a super ball. The other one I referred to as the ox with iron ankles. Um, One is very long and lean, and you can imagine like very, very bouncy, like doesn't even have to bend her knees and she flies through the roof. All stretch shortening cycle. But her force production and things like that are not great, especially eccentrically. So she gets a lot of jumper's knee because she's relying on those tendons all the time. And then the other one was very much just muscling her jump. She was strong as an ox, had no ankle mobility, and was not very bouncy, but could just push like no one's business. And she could basically just shot put herself up into the air. And so my goal with them was to train them the exact opposite of how they like to jump in the off season. You know, can I expose the super ball to a little bit of force production, especially eccentrically, and kind of make them go slower, maybe a little deeper and heavier? And then with the ox with the iron ankles, can I make you move very quickly? And can I teach you to just bounce and rely on those tendons a little bit more and strengthen those up? Then as soon as we get to the season, I reverse that back to like, okay, now we're maximizing your strengths. But I think
Yeah.
your strengths are more protected because if you just take the jumper's knee idea, if you have better eccentric force production capabilities, your tendons are going to be significantly healthier, especially if you're a very elastic athlete. So I brought them back in and I'm mitigating injury in that way. But I could also see that like we were improving jump height even during like the depth of the off season. And normally if you're doing like slow force work, you don't expect to see your athletes going up in jump height. I think when that's the one thing that athlete is missing in their jump profile, I've actually seen jump height go off in the like very early off season when we're going like absolute strength, slow, heavy, slow tempos. That for a lot of people that doesn't make sense or shouldn't work. I think if you are targeted enough in your approach, it actually works that way. And that's why I really love looking at these like technique tier because I don't think you need a ton of jump data to be able to start assessing that. I think you could use just one. And this is another thing where it's like if you have any sort of normative data, you can compare to that instead and say like, how does this look compared to other people? If you don't have it, I also think you could start using AI as a way to start helping you with some of the research on that and say like, how do these numbers look in comparison to like other sports we do have data on? Is there anything that stands out as being a big red flag? And then of course, don't just accept what AI tells you point blank and say this is all truth and this must be right, but you can ask it to identify anything that looks different. Or this is one of my favorite things is AI is very good at math and I am very, very terrible at statistics. And so I can put this in there. And again, I have everything blinded. So it doesn't know. I'm not putting identifiable information online. I'm just putting codes. And I say, how does VB008 compare to the rest of the team? Like, give me a Z score, just comparison standard deviation wise to my team or just to their position. And how just amongst our little crew do we look? If I don't have enough information to compare to the entire country or to all D1 schools or all D2 schools, how do I compare just to my little like microcosm? And if I can compare to that, then I can start identifying outliers just in that. And that helps me get an idea of where this person needs to train to improve. So again, I don't think you need a lot of jump data. I think you just need to be creative in how you analyze it and how you try and identify weak links and strengths. And I think there's a million ways to skin that cat. And I use AI a lot to help me with it, because if I can get an objective number like an R score or an R value, then I'm able to very much say like, okay, this is how I want to approach this, because this person is like 2 standard deviations below the norm for our team.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's freaking awesome. I love it. Um, and it's definitely something I need to continue to think about. And I think we talked about this on the phone, but Vault is coming out with their own AI. So I'm kind of interested to see how effective, how efficient, how easily accessible that's going to be. Um, I don't know when. I've heard first of the year. I've also recently heard earlier than that, like September, October, somewhere in that range. So it'll be interesting to see how that is factored into what you're doing as well, and what we end up doing at Fairmont. But the one thing that I was going to ask you is, like, for where do I want to start? So you have like percent from the average. Is that, do you think percentage, especially in, because I was going to do standard deviation, but I'm like, okay, but if I only have three metrics, like a standard deviation is like not, I feel like it doesn't give you like as much insight because you're just not pulling as much. Whereas like if I have an athlete, if I have a football player that weighed in 180, then was 181, and then now he's 179, like 174, like that's a pretty significant change in
Yeah.
their percent baseline. So are you more of a fan of percentages, standard deviation, eventually doing some sort of Z score? Like what's your, and is that, again, is that a question for AI of like, hey, here's the data. What would be the most efficient way or effective way? Like what's kind of your thought on the statistics side of it? Which I know you
Yeah.
said
So
isn't your wheelhouse, but it's more of a
no,
you have
and
more of a wheelhouse than I do.
this is exactly how I would approach that if I was thinking that same thing and I didn't have an answer. Is I would spend some time before going to AI or anything, just kind of thinking about it. Maybe call one or two people and ask them a quick question. So similar to what we're doing right now, like, what do you prefer, standard deviation, Z-score, or whatever? Um, I think it kind of depends a lot on the context. Um, so if we're looking at that and you only have like three metrics, you don't have a bunch of legacy data, things like that. Uh, I I think you could make a case for either. And I think that's a lot of what we do. Is I don't think there's like always spit like 100% correct answers in a lot of what we do. I always say we're just kind of building puzzles, and your job is to describe the puzzle piece you're looking for as best as you can. But we don't have exact measurements. So it's like, just do, if you can justify it, I think there is validity behind it.
Yeah.
So long, because you justified it for some specific purpose. So use it for that purpose. If you go through and say like, why would I use a percentage? Why would I use a standard deviation? And you end up coming out and saying like, well, I can see a good reason to use both. Maybe you use both. Um, I think it just depends on, like, again, the context. But I would do that. I would sit there and think about it, try and come up with which one in my head makes the most sense. And then instead of starting with AI, then I would take those thoughts to AI and I would say,
Yeah.
troubleshoot it. Poke holes in my logic. Tell me why percentage might be better than standard deviation. And then tell me why Z-score might be better than either one of those, or why it might be the worst of all the options. And when you add that context to it, it does a very good job at giving you like conceptual ideas. Um, from there, what I would do is then I do the exact same right back to AI. So it gives me its thoughts. It's tried to troubleshoot me. Now I'm going to try and troubleshoot it and tell it why it's wrong. I'm going to say,
Right.
like, I'm the coach, I'm the human, I'm the one that's been out there and actually done this. So let me tell you from a human perspective why you're incorrect.
Huh.
And
Yeah.
so I find that when you do that, all of a sudden you end up kind of coming, because you know AI is sickly sycophantic. Like, it's going to sit there and be like, yeah, whatever you say is the best idea ever. And it's like, it's it's not always the best idea ever. It's like AI is handing out participation trophies like no one's business. Um, and so if you can fight back on that and then kind of tell it to fight you, tell it to kind of tell you where you're wrong, that's what you need. And so then you're using it more like an intern or a colleague. And the nice thing I find about it is when you start battling your own ideas with AI, it's hard to go to someone you respect, like a mentor or a colleague, and say like, "Hey, tear my ideas apart and tell me why I might be stupid for thinking this," because you have an ego, and they also care about you, and they're not going to try and hurt your feelings intentionally. AI doesn't care, and I don't care what AI thinks of me. So I can go out there, no ego, and I can put any thought out there and say, like, tell me why I've been thinking about progressive overload wrong for my entire life and how I'm actually like not thinking about it correctly. That's a hard conversation to have, with another person, it's an easy conversation to have with AI. And then once you're kind of self-aware on where you're lacking, now you can take it to another person you trust and say, like, hey, I feel like I might be overlooking this part of it. Now it comes across as this person is growing and becoming intelligent. This person is not just like clueless. So I think it can do a lot for like a networking perspective, things like that as well. But that's kind of how I would approach like your current situation is I think it through, add it to AI, troubleshoot the AI answer, and then come up with your final thoughts. And then once you've picked a direction, stick with it. Like stick to your guns and see it through long enough that you can see if it actually made a difference.
Right. No, I think that's awesome. Definitely gonna have to play around with that. And again, this is something I could definitely be asking AI, but I'm gonna ask you first, and then I'll talk to AI later. So for asymmetries, because I know there's like debate on like functional asymmetry, how much of a difference it is, or how much of a big deal it is. We've already had some guys that are kind of in a return to play mode, jumping on the plates, and their numbers like they're definitely favoring the non-injured leg. Um, how much, because you have that on like the health side, how much of that has been something that you've used either in a return to play situation where you're trying to get that athlete back to what they were before they got injured, or how much have you been able to use that in maybe a predictive standpoint of, hey, like you were at 3%, now you're at 9%, now you're at 15%, like is something going on? And then they tell you, oh yeah, I've actually been dealing with some tendonitis that I haven't told anybody about. Like where do you stand with asymmetry?
Yeah, so I use it just kind of as monitoring. I'm looking for trend lines. I view it very much the same way I view scale weight for someone. It is, if that is your only metric for success, like whether it's like bodybuilding or whatever, the scale weight is going to lie to you. It's a terrible single metric. It's great to have in a battery of metrics, though. I view asymmetry the same way. So when I first built like my jump dashboard, AI's first thought was to say like, well, the best asymmetry is 0. And I'm like, love that, but also you sound like an intern's first day on the job. 0 is not realistic. Like we're human beings, we're built diagonal and we have dominant sides, all of that. I'm like, that's not going to happen. And so I challenged my AI answer and said like, well, let's think more realistically rather than just going with 0%. So then we started talking about like, okay, well, what if we just try and say like, is there a huge deviation from this person's norm? And that's why I started comparing to like season average. And at first I was like, well, maybe I want to go against all-time best. Like if that's close to 0, maybe it's like, okay, this is the best we've ever seen. But if you've jumped enough people on force plates, you've seen athletes that are very athletic and highly proficient at what they do come in and jump like it's their first day on earth. And it's like they like fall off. Like I've seen so many athletes like stumble and fall off the force plates while jumping. I'm like, if I take that one jump and use that as the baseline, it's going to say like all your athletes are so much healthier because this one time they completely missed a plate. And so I'm like, let's go season average because that's going to be, or you could even do like a rolling average for all the jumps that person has ever done. And then I'm just saying, like, are we going in a huge swing over the course of the last session to where that average is? Um, if we shift by more than 10% to one side or the other, I am concerned. Why are we doing that? But I do the same thing with any of the technique level variables. If I see someone shift drastically in any technique or health level variable, I say, why did we shift? Like, and so I'm going to go ask them questions. I'm going to be like, are you feeling okay? Have you been sleeping well? If you've been jumping, so like we can take like volleyball again for an example. We just started our preseason camp. If we have sometimes up to like 5 hours of practice in a day, and someone comes in and they jump really weird, I'm going to say like, are you feeling okay? Or has this huge increase in jumping worn your nervous system down to a point where now you are no longer able to be the super ball you normally are, and now you have to try and muscle it because you do not have the nervous system capability to keep firing that way. And so you can have a simple conversation and get rid of a lot of the concerns. And so rather than it dictating to me like what my response needs to be or what is concerning and what isn't, I want it to flag people as yellow if we have like a statistically significant change. So somewhere around like 5 to 10% difference between sessions. That tells me to just go have a conversation and add context and see if context will explain away the difference. If I see like a 15 to 20% or more change, it's going to flag it as red. And that in my mind says we need to have a serious conversation about this and say, like, why are you suddenly landing completely on one leg? Are you experiencing pain? And it might mean bringing in like the athletic trainer and talking with them without the athlete there and saying, have you noticed anything with so and so? Have they said anything to you? That's my let's dig deep and really try and figure this out, because something is clearly wrong unless you can look me in the eye and confidently say, I just had two bad jumps today and I was not motivated to take a third one, even though they knew that option was available. And sometimes that will happen. Sometimes we just have a bad day, but I'm like, can I explain it away with context? If not, then there's an issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. That's kind of the approach that we're going to do. I'm in a similar thought of the way that we're kind of approaching our data. Cause again, just going back to this, the time efficiency, like I would love to be able to look at 20 metrics, but we're trying to narrow it down to
Yeah.
like 6 or 7. And that's not counting body weight, like body weight's a metric, jump height's a metric. It's the stuff aside from that. So we're doing the eccentric braking asymmetry. Cause I feel like I'm most more concerned of what kind of asymmetries are you have on your eccentric portion versus on the concentric. You could make the argument that's probably not real. And again, that's probably not right. It could be looking at other ones. But yeah, it's something where I do think the asymmetry again, especially because the two kids that I know are dealing with an injury or return to play are the two kids that right now on the football team, we've only tested 10 to 15 football players so far, but they're the two kids that stand out in terms of having an actual, like they have like a 22% asymmetry, right? Which is, I feel like already substantial. So,
yeah. On that note, really quick.
Go ahead.
On that note, I think it also depends on like the sport you're doing. Cause like if I saw a football player that had like a huge like eccentric asymmetry, that would be concerning to me. Cause like that's your strongest position, right? Is the eccentric portion. If you have that big of an asymmetry showing up there, that means you're probably just masking it on the concentric side. And so you know that like, especially depending on position, you're going to be relying on that strength a lot. Whereas if I saw that same asymmetry with a volleyball athlete, I wouldn't be as concerned. I'd be more concerned about landing eccentric asymmetry, because I'm like, that's where this person's going to get hurt. No one's going to get hurt going down for their jump because they barely go down. It's going to be the landing from like 2 to 3 feet of jump height and you coming down. And if you're landing completely on one leg, well, if you look up volleyball, we get a lot of stress fractures, especially in our left leg, because we tend to land on that one all by itself. So if I can identify those things, and that says like same idea, different sport, different context is kind of what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that for sure. And I personally think, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, I personally think that eccentric strength in general is probably something that we as strength coaches probably don't spend enough time worrying about. And whether that's, training more tempo training or just focusing more on the eccentric or getting like oh gosh, what's the pulley system? Like the eccentric pulley, you know what I'm talking about.
K boxes and stuff.
Yeah, K box, like having a K box, like whatever it is. But anyway, last thing on just the specific metrics. So I feel like I was always under the impression that counter movement depth, especially for like elastic jumpers, for elastic jumpers, they went through less range of motion, but I was just, or no, yeah, sorry. Elastic jumpers go through a deeper range of motion. Kind of your more like whatever squatty muscle jumpers go through less of a range of motion as they become fatigued. Am I getting those confused, or is it always the same? Like, what do you see with volleyball? Do you have some girls that as they get fatigued, their red flag is they go through a deeper range of motion so they need more time to produce force, or have to use more muscle base versus tendon base, versus you're like maybe like your libero actually goes through a shorter range of motion because they're just fatigued. Like, do you see two different trends there, or is it all the same trend?
Yeah, part of it is position specific, but a lot of it is like if we take my athlete that I refer to as the Super Ball, when she gets tired, she starts squatting a lot deeper into her squat. Like I can tell you instantly that is her sign of neurological fatigue, is because she can no longer activate things as quickly. She's no longer using the stretch reflex or stretch shortening cycle as efficiently. And so she starts squatting a little deeper because her body intuitively knows she needs to push. And so she's starting to muscle it a little bit more. That can be good and bad. If your muscle is not ready for it and all of a sudden you started to just put it all on the muscle and less on the tendon, you could potentially like cramp up. You could, you can have all sorts of issues that might pop up from that, especially in a game type scenario. But then when you take like my ox with the iron ankles, she starts squatting less deep because she's starting to get fatigued and she isn't driving down that bar. Her muscles don't want to move through that big of a range of motion because more range of motion with the same weight and stuff like that is just more work done. So her body naturally tries to spare work, whereas the other athlete tries to spare neurological readiness and put more work in to replace it. So they start to switch and they start to meet in the midline, which is you're jumping without your natural form, and it's not going to be great either way. So different athletes will, I think, respond in different ways to whatever fatigue they're accumulating more of based on their strategy for jumping or the way they play.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense, and that's kind of where my thought was at with it too. So that's like if you see somebody in the red, we have to look at that of, are they in the red towards what they normally do, or are they in the red away from what they normally do? So I think
Yeah.
that's a key factor. How many different like obviously we mentioned Sparta, and obviously we talked about that. I have a lot of familiarity with Sparta, and to an extent I was a big fan of them as well. I think they just did a good job of simplifying it for especially young busy coaches in like pro baseball when I was in pro baseball. But they obviously had that. They're like, you kind of had three plus a fourth bucket, right? You kind of had your like your load and explode person, your low drive, your low explode, like all that stuff. You had like your U shape, your low explode, high load, and high drive. How many different buckets? Like if we were walking into the weight room, how many different buckets would your athletes maybe be in? Like how many different groupings are you kind of seeing?
In general, I'll try and like when it comes to just jumps in general, I try and keep it towards like three. Like, are you eccentric dominant? Are you low dom or are you drive dominant? Are you explode dominant? Like I want to know what your best one is, and then I want to know what your worst one is. Um, and again, it depends on the season of the year is which one I'm going to attack. At least I'm going to focus on the most. Like all of those attributes are going to be trained, and a lot of them are going to be trained simultaneously. But it's the one that I'm emphasizing most that's going to be changing over the time of year. So again, off season, I'm going to find whichever one you're weakest at. I'm going to attack that as hard as I can. I'm going to try and build it up. And then once we start getting like preseason, in season, I start to transition that distribution back towards emphasizing your strengths and helping you do what your body naturally likes to do, so that you don't have to overthink it when you're out there playing. You can just go out there and we can say, go play and play hard. And what your body naturally does is going to come out by emphasizing
Yeah.
your strengths. That's why they're your strengths. Um,
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. So, I mean, I guess I don't really put them into a ton of buckets, like in that sense. Um, but there have been times like when I'm creating like volleyball workouts, and again, this is a privilege I have at like working at like a D1 school and not having a ridiculous amount of athletes I have to program for, is there are times where it's like we'll go out there and that first exercise that we're all doing, I know I want a squat pattern. And I will sometimes have like 7 or 8 different variations of the squat pattern running. And that's based on like 7 to 8 different like buckets for that period of time. That happens a lot more in the off season when I have a lot more time to kind of play around and go down rabbit holes of like how I want to train people. But it's like some of those will be like I have like over the summer I had like a snap group. And the snap group needed elasticity. And I called it the snap group because the athletes kind of understand what I'm like, you need to be snappy. They kind of get what that looks like intuitively. So they kind of now know every movement you do when you're in the snap group is going to be done in a snappy fashion. And then I have what like my spine safe group. They know that it's like you struggle with low back pain or upper back pain. Your job is to make sure we do not inflame or exacerbate the pain you're feeling in your back while trying to push the weight as hard as you can to create a more robust system. And so they know that they are going to put a governor on themselves. And those are the ones I tend to trust to put a governor on themselves. So if they're brand new and I don't know how they respond to pain, they're probably not going in that group. Even if they do have experience back pain, they'll probably go in a different one where it's like, I will be more in charge of instructing you on how to put that governor on until you've earned the right to put one on yourself because I know you're not going to just slack off.
Yeah.
So like I'll create like tons of different groups. Again, it just kind of depends on the month and like how many different needs I'm seeing at the same time. So like again, off season we were working with sometimes like 7 or 8 different groups. Now that we're hitting preseason camps, it's like the only groups I'm really putting people into now we are like it's position specific. It's going to be like it's going to be hitters, setters, and defensive specialists. And then I might make individual tweaks to some people. Like if I know that someone is drastically like eccentric dominant or someone is very, very elastic dominant, then with those people, I might kind of say like, okay, we're going to change the way you do this exercise just a little bit to try and help you out more. Um, but that's just like slight modifications. It's not going to be like full on programming differences anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a very, because I know that was like we had some heated debates when I was with the Rockies with Sparta, well, with us as a staff and even with some of the Sparta people and the athletes really were the ones that were kind of bringing it to our attention. They're like, all right, well, if this is what I suck at, like, why don't I just focus on the things I'm actually good at? Like, if I suck at, low drive, why do I have to keep doing all these split squats? Why don't I just keep being good at the load and explode things? So I think there's definitely, and again, I see both sides of it. I see the argument of like, do the things you're good at because that's what got you here. But also, yeah, but what is that lagging, like, whatever it is, lagging adaptation, lagging output, lagging metric? Like, let's put all of our like focus on that, because if that's what's holding you back, if we can elevate that, then the other two things are probably gonna, it's kind of the tide that lifts all boats. So again, I don't have an answer, and I'm not providing an answer on that. It's just something I like to think about as well, because I do think I like the way that you're doing it, where off season is kind of your chance to really, really, really individualize an athlete's program, and in seasons, kind of like at that point, they're just, their sport takes over, and you're just trying to enhance whatever they're already good at.
Yep.
Let me look here. I had one more question on that. How much have you seen like and I know I asked you this a little bit the other day on the phone in a separate, I kind of asked you how much of this affected performance, but how much have you seen this like affect the way, like the buy-in and the way that your athletes and even your sport coaches like approach the weight room? Like, is this something that it was easy to buy them and like, or easy to sell them? Or is it something that they're like, yeah, but I like doing front squats, like with whatever bands. And you're like, yeah, but now you got to do tempo split squats. Like, how do you kind of go about that in terms of getting the buy-in?
Yeah. Kind of interesting because I didn't start my first year with this. This is something I kind of rolled out in year number 2. So as soon as we finished like the second season leading into this off season is when I really rolled out like the kind of like radical individualization idea. And so as I put it out there, like my athletes actually responded really well to it right off the bat. I think that's due to like pre-existing buy-in from kind of doing things a little more traditional. But one of my biggest things that I believe is huge is if you if you have athletes that feel better, they instantly buy in. So I had like if I have someone come in and their low back hurts and I individualize for you just a little bit, and that individualization makes it so your back doesn't hurt as much as if you did what everyone else is doing, you instantly trust me a little bit more because you're like, this person is taking care of my back. My back feels better. Like everyone likes to feel better. And so if I can do that, that's my fastest way of creating buy-in, is just by trying to help you feel a little bit better in that moment. So that helped a lot, especially again with my low backs, with my knee pains, with shoulder pain, anyone that has anything, like that's where I started, is let's individualize away from these to make sure that we're feeling better. And then that allowed me to kind of then say like, okay, well, I individualized to make you feel better. Now let me individualize to make you move better. And that's where I now have to say, you like to be elastic. Well, you're welcome to the world of slow tempos and heavy weights. And they hate it because it is the opposite of what they're good at. And working with college athletes or athletes in general, we like to be good. We don't want to struggle. And so we want to do the things we're good at, not the things we're bad at. And so they start like they have to trust you. And that's where it's like by helping them feel better first, then when I tell them like, you know how that worked? Well, this is going to work too. I can kind of drag some of that credibility over and say, now I'm going to make you do things that are intentionally uncomfortable and are intentionally hard for you, because that's going to make it so you're going to improve, because we have to attack those weak links. And that's always a little bit trickier, but like same thing, like they'll show up and they'll do it. Like I've got them to a point where they will trust me on it. They'll show up and they'll go through it that way. And when you're then able to validate that with numbers, and I love bringing athletes into my office. I tell them that if they ever want to see their jump numbers or all their metrics, I'll sit down and talk them through it. Again, a privilege of having just like fewer athletes and more time. but I can show them how those technique level variables are changing. And then I can show them how that is affecting like their jump height over time. And when we're doing that, then all of a sudden I can say like, no, I've now got numbers to validate that what we're doing is working for you. And that then locks the buy-in in. Like once they see that and they see you're not just guessing, then they love it. And I'm big on also inviting athletes to challenge me a little bit. I'm like, if you ever want to point in my workout sheet that I gave you, and you can point to any word, any number, anything on that sheet and ask me why. And if I can't give you a why in that moment, I don't want you to trust me as much because it means I'm blowing smoke up your ass. I'm like, I should have a validation for everything. And I've had a lot of people like actually take me up on that. And they're like, well, I saw this video on TikTok that said that this exercise is completely useless. Why are we doing it? And I'll be like, because that is a bodybuilder and that exercise is completely useless for a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
You are not a bodybuilder, you're an athlete. And so that is actually highly effective for you. And so I love it because, again, them feeling like they have that option to kind of challenge you and understand why and that get that education, I believe makes it so they do buy in. And I also think that education where it's like I'm able to tell them why they're in a certain group and what the goal of that group is, makes it so every movement they do is going to be done with better intent and better quality because they're doing it in the way, like I could tell everyone to squat, but if I need you to squat in a specific manner, you need to understand why we're squatting in that manner. And then you kind of innately start moving that way because you know what we're trying to accomplish. So if I have to cut an extra 5 minutes out of my lift so that I can give a little bit more information to people, or if I have to, I've actually done this before where it's like I've printed up sheets about like, this is the adaptation we're going for you. This is how it's going to work. And here's why. And I'll just hand those out if I don't have time to explain it. And
yeah, no, I think that's awesome.
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of, I've mentioned this to some of my assistant coaches and stuff, but it's something where like I actually probably, and I'm sure you've had this struggle too. Our athletes usually are pretty bought in on everything. And I think a lot of times they're just grateful because they've actually had somebody that they finally have somebody in their life that like in their training life that actually cares. Like we had 2 freshman football players on campus today. It was the first time they've ever trained with us. And like I literally told them like, hey, this is the heaviest you're allowed to go. We were just doing power cleans from blocks. I was like, this is the heaviest you're gonna go. You're only doing jump shrugs today. I was like, we are going to literally baby step you and like get you because you're here for the next 4 to 5 years. Like we're going to make sure that we have a slow cooker mindset and we're going to get you from point A to point B and you're going to have the best power cleans that you've ever seen. And they both came up to me after lift today and was like, Coach, like we've never had somebody like pull us aside and just tell us like that we're going to do something the right way. We just do it. We don't even have somebody coach show us technique. Like I was like, I mean, first of all, that's crazy, which it's a high school level. So it is what it is. You kind of expect that, unfortunately, but yeah, I think it's something that's huge, but I honestly end up a lot of times more like butting heads with coaches. And again, I'm not afraid to say this on here is like the sad reality of that. Sometimes not the sad reality, the reality of it is it's sad because it's frustrating. I guess I should say the frustrating reality is like, I don't know any coach that we have, and again, this is not a knock on our coach. We have great coaches. This is just the reality. I don't know any coach that we've had at Fairmont that has spent as much of their time of their life dedicated towards like one thing as well. Like there's no one that's done it more than me. There might be somebody that's coached longer than me. Like I'm like the 3rd or 4th oldest coach that we have, but in terms of like where I'm like reading a research paper every single day, right? Where I'm listening to 2 or 3 podcasts every single day, where I'm reading an audiobook every single week. Like, I just don't know, like coaching reps is important, but I don't know if there's anybody that's trying to expand their, and again, this is like an arrogant thing to say, but I just don't know. I just don't know if that's the case. So like, I get very frustrated when I'm dealing with coaches and they're asking us why we're doing stuff and I give them the answer of why we're doing it. And then it's still not like good enough. And it's like, coach, like I don't know what else to do. Like, so one thing that I've thought about doing, and again, I don't know if this is a good idea or not. I don't know if the coaches will just feel like I'm being like, I don't know, facetious about it, is literally almost creating like a blog, like a weekly or like a monthly blog and just sending it out to our coaches, because again, it's 90% of our coaches they're like, hey, you know your thing, you freaking do it. But then it's like, when we get that 1 or 2 that just will not understand of what the value is. Like, coach, I'm not going to throw something in here that I don't think is going to make our athletes better and healthier and safer. Anyway, a little bit of a tangent for me, just a little bit of a rant. Sometimes it's good to just, it's good to get that shit out.
Got to get it out. Got to get it out.
Yeah. All right. Last couple of questions. Here we go. Rapid fire. And when I say rapid fire, I will try not to have as much feedback. Your answer can be as long as you want. It's less about me running my mouth and more about you guys still running your mouth. So I think this is a great one. All right. what's the main role of strength and conditioning coaches? Like what's our realistic expectations and outcomes?
I think the main role, I mean, is to make sure that our athletes are able to participate in their sport more frequently. Like we are not going to make an athlete better at their sport just by telling them to lift a weight. Like you can see that like there's a lot of people that will show up and it's like if you just come in and I get you to squat and like even if I'm doing like the most sport specific squat I can have you do for your specific sport, you're not going to instantly walk out onto a court and suddenly be better, right? Like no matter what I do in the weight room, I'm not going to turn you into Michael Jordan, right? I can make you, I can give you physical qualities that will make it so you can then participate in the sport better. But that's all I can really do is I am just basically giving you tools. Like in a sense, we are basically just like Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. We have a bunch of tools at our disposal and we are just kind of counseling you on which ones are going to be most effective for the job you need to perform. But it's up to you to actually use those tools and apply it. And so the way I see it is like that is our job is to help increase availability and help increase the potential for the athlete to be able to participate in their practices, competitions, etc. And that should be number one. And a lot of that comes with us like reducing injuries and making sure that we just feel good enough to move. Um, Again, like I could make you super strong, but if you're sore all the time, you're going to be a crappy athlete. Like if you go out there and your nervous system is just drained because of what I did, that's not beneficial.
Right. No, I get 100%. All right. What do you think makes like a young strength coach like a good hire? Like if you, and eventually you're probably going to be in this situation where you're going to have to hire a young coach, a fresh coach. What would you be looking for? What do you think makes them a good hire?
I love people that say I don't know. Is too many people have an answer for everything nowadays, and they actually know nothing. Plenty of Dunning-Kruger effect going around. So I want to see someone that says I don't know. And I think the older you are, the more you say it, the better. And like I think the people that are the smartest that I've met, they think about things with such nuance and context that they're like, well, like there is not one specific answer for anything. And so it's like that's where I think like soft skills are important because it's like as you really dig into it, it's like I can ask you for a bunch of these hard skills and have you prove it to me. But if you get too confident in your hard skills, you start to think that's all there is to this game. And you start to then develop a Dunning-Kruger effect instead of saying, I know nothing and I need to expand and learn. And so like you were just saying, you're reading articles every day, you're listening to podcasts every day, you're talking to coaches on your podcast, you are educating yourself every day. I don't think you're doing that because you think you know everything. I think you're doing that
It's the
because you
opposite.
think
Exactly.
you think you're like, how am I ever going to learn enough?
Yeah.
And I think someone that feels that way, that is a quality I actually want to see. If you can be confident in the way you coach while feeling like you know absolutely nothing and you're striving the best you can to learn, that tells me all I need to know. But at the same time, if you're just like so anxious you can't do anything and you can't trust your gut and you can't actually coach, well, then then we're going to struggle in a different way.
Yeah. Now, a phrase I always say is confident humility. I
Yeah,
think that's
love
something
that.
a good factor, a good characteristic to have. All right, what's your favorite lift that you either do or that you like to coach or like to program? What's your favorite lift?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, personally, I love a trap bar deadlift. For myself, like I can get heavy on that, always makes me feel good. One of my favorite things to kind of be throwing into programs and actually doing myself lately is like a I love using like safety squat bars, getting like a Hatfield setup, and actually doing like reverse lunges or split squats off of a Hatfield setup. And I find that like adding that stability in, especially with like tall, lanky athletes like my volleyball girls, they don't have to lean forward because they're all legs and no torso. So it allows them to stay upright. It allows them to use those long legs to drive through in a way that helps them with like approach jumps. And so just seeing the effectiveness of that. And then also like I have a huge background in like working in like bodybuilding. I competed for a little bit back in the day. So when I train myself, I train a lot for aesthetics and not necessarily just for function because meatheads are going to be meatheads. Um, the work I get out of that and the way it just trashes my glutes and my hamstrings, I'm just like anything that makes it so I struggle to go upstairs, I love. Big fan of
yeah.
that. Like,
Yeah.
so
No, that's cool.
those
That's
get
cool.
me.
What what's like a and we may have touched on this a little bit already, but what is like a strength and conditioning hill that like you're willing to die on?
Uh, I've got one. There is no such thing as incorrect form. Which I am very I coach up form really, really hard, and I am a stickler on it. But I will tell every single one of my athletes, like same thing when I invite them to challenge me, I say there is no incorrect technique or form if you can justify to me why you are doing that way. And so I believe that if you can give me a good justification, whether they're like, hey, I'm working around this thing in my back, if it makes sense, or if I can't think of a better way to work around that, then you're doing it right in my mind.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it, like everyone's body is built different. Like especially when you get down to like skeletal structure and things like that. So like some of these bigger movements that are so like compound movements that are so important in athletic performance, if we were doing like an isolation movement, like a bicep curl, there's a correct way to do a bicep curl, but there's not as much variation in how that elbow is set up. But if we're looking at like we're bringing hips, knees, and ankles all into it together, no two people are going to be the same, like not even siblings. And so we need to meet you where you're at and work around your specific body type. And if your body is intuitively telling you to do something, and we can go through and talk about it and justify it, then I believe it's a correct way to do it. And that normally means like it's not going to be like glaringly dangerous, like deadlifting with the most rounded low back you can find. You're not going to be able to justify that to me. I mean, maybe you could, good luck, but like, I mean,
Yeah.
people can justify Jefferson curls, and so
Yeah.
I'm like, do your best to justify it to me. And like, I love that because I think it gets athletes thinking about what they feel and why they're doing things a certain way. And I love to approach them with that question of why are we doing it this way before I just start barking out commands on how to change it up. And I think again that creates a better buy-in because they start to tie into their own body, and then I don't have to spend as much time fixing like silly mistakes like that.
Yeah, I think now that you describe it like that, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think the other thing too, when you're having athletes try to ask you why about things, a lot of times, and this goes back to coaches too, like they'll realize real quick like where their knowledge level stops. Like when you're like, well, I want to deadlift around the back, and you're like, okay, well, justify why. And then they're like, well, I don't
Yeah.
know. I saw a video on TikTok. Okay, well, that's not a scientific reasoning. Like why? So I think that's a cool thing. All right, person, dead or alive, coach, doesn't matter. Just somebody that you would most want to have dinner with.
If I'm going with a coach, this is just because like I've been seeing some of the stuff they've been putting online and all, and I would love to pick their brain on it. Erica Lowry is doing some crazy good things with like jumps and stuff like that with her teams. Never actually talked to her, but I love what she's putting out there. I would be very interested to hear what she has to say because it looks like she's getting great results, and like her personal results with jumping are like astronomical. So would love to have an opportunity to pick her brain.
Yeah, no, I think I just started following her like a couple months ago, so I agree with you on that's cool. All right, this was a unique question. I think I don't know if I've heard this. I've been asking it the last couple of podcasts, but I don't know if I've heard any other podcasts ask it. What would be your ideal NIL deal? So if like you had a company that you could pick with, and you got to wear their gear, eat their food, drink their product, like whatever it is, you're repping their brand. What would that be?
Hmm, that's a good one. I mean, part of me wants to say like I have to eat a ridiculous amount of food every single day. My metabolism is just outrageous, and so I'm like, whatever is going to make that easier. So give me something like muscle egg or something like that where I can just drink egg whites all day. I'm like, that could be huge. But at the same time, I'm like, man, it would be really great to be like basically have an NIL or sponsorship deal with something like Sorenex or Hammer Strength, where it's like, oh, just throw equipment my way. Let me build that Mark Wahlberg style personal home gym and just have like a multi-million-dollar facility outside my house. Like that would be that would be cool. Just
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
dream.
that'd be sick. Or even just even just have a personal chef, like have an NIL deal with a person. Like I love to cook, but man, having someone
Yeah.
be able to just come home and have like super healthy, clean food ready to eat at all times, like would be amazing.
Yeah. Even like
Yeah.
those meal prep companies, like
Yeah.
what is it, like Freshly or whatever, like just send me
Yeah.
meals that I just have to heat up. I'm like, oh, I would take that all day.
Yeah. All right, last question here. And again, I appreciate your time. What are you most excited about with your opportunity at Auburn?
I think it's going to be something different. There's lots of people to learn from. I like everywhere you go, you're going to learn from the people around you, especially if you approach it with confident humility, like you said. So excited to learn from them, grow from those opportunities, but also working with a sport like gymnastics. I find that it's a very, very complicated sport, but I believe it has a lot of transfer and crossover into basically anything else you're going to do because in a way it seems like we're like track and field seem to be like the most like kind of pure sports in one sense. I feel like gymnastics is like a very pure athleticism where it's not uh in that it's like so complicated. It's like how can you perform these feats? And so working with athletes like that and learning how to help them get better at basically having to do a little bit of everything minus like physical contact with another athlete, I think is going to be very eye-opening and fun to experiment with and grow in that way. Also, the coaches that are down there, I think I've got a couple of great coaching staffs that I'm going to be able to work with. And that's something that's big for me because I know the coaching staffs I've had here at West Virginia could not have been better to me. They are absolutely fantastic, and it just wrecks me inside having to say goodbye to staffs and teams that I love so much. But knowing that I'm going somewhere where I'm also going to have coaches that already seem to trust and buy into the process and believe in it, I think that is something that is very exciting as well. So just learning from sports coaches to other strength coaches, everyone like that across the board.
No, I think that's an awesome answer. And I'm excited for you. I think it's a great opportunity for you, and I appreciate you hopping on here and kind of sharing your information. I'm
Yeah,
definitely gonna take some of the stuff that you said in terms of like the Vald, sports science and implement that with what we're doing at Fairmont. And I'm sure I'll let you get settled in, but we might be having a phone call again here in a couple months or so, to kind of just pick your brain a little bit more.
absolutely.
So, and
Yeah.
and uh, and
Well,
I'll treat you like you'll be my I'll have Chat GBT and Google Gemini, and then Easton Nelson AI will be also tearing apart my sports science program. So, but I appreciate you, and it was good catching up with you and good getting to chat with you. This was a lot of fun. All right.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. All right. Best of luck to you. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Have a good one.